Wrong seat, kid. Economy's back there, past the curtain where the air smells like stale disappointment. Archibald's voice dripped with disdain, each word a calculated jab. He didn't just want Darius gone, he wanted to make an example. A black kid in a hoodie didn't belong in 1A, not in his world. What Archibald didn't know? I knew. 2 rows back, an old man watched, his eyes like chips of Arctic ice. He wasn't just a passenger, he was the silent puppeteer, the one man who could unravel Archibald's empire with a whisper. Archibald sneered, oblivious. He had no clue that Darius's quiet dignity would soon become his reckoning. Oh, the irony. He'd learn soon enough. Very soon, Ted the whole first-class cabin to know that a boy in a faded hoodie didn't belong in seat 1A. But Preston made a fatal calculation that day. He didn't know who was watching from the aisle. He didn't know that the man silently observing the chaos wasn't just a passenger. He was the one man who could end Preston's career with a single phone call. The automated glass doors of JFK International Airport slid open, letting in a gust of humid July air. But inside Terminal 4, the atmosphere was chilled and sterile. Darius Cole adjusted the strap of his backpack. It was an old thing, frayed at the seams, with a patch of the NASA logo ironing on, crookedly near the zipper. He looked down at his shoes, scuffed high-tops that had seen better days, and then up at the gleaming sign that read, Royal Horizon Air, First-Class Priority Check-In. He felt the eyes immediately. They were heavy, judgmental, and piercing. Darius was 17, black, and dressed like he was heading to a pickup basketball game rather than an international flight to London. He pulled his boarding pass out of his pocket, his thumb brushing over the bold letters, Seat 1A. It still felt surreal. He hadn't bought this ticket. It was a gift, no, a scholarship grant, from the Future Innovators Tech Summit. He had coded an algorithm that optimized solar panel efficiency by 15%, catching the eye of some very powerful investors. They flew him out for the final pitch. They wanted him rested. They wanted him treated like royalty. But to the people in the priority line, he looked like a glitch in the system. "Excuse me," a sharp voice cut through the ambient noise of the terminal. Darius turned. Behind him stood a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that fit too perfectly, with a watch that caught the overhead lights like a signal flare. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and a platinum credit card in the other, tapping it impatiently against his thigh. This was Preston Archibald, Senior VP of Sales for Omnicorp, a logistics giant. He was a man used to getting his way, used to doors opening before he even reached for the handle. "The line for unaccompanied minors and economy drop-offs is that way," Preston said, pointing a manicured finger toward the chaotic mass of people at the main counters. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. His tone was dismissive, the way one might speak to a stray dog blocking a driveway. Darius tightened his grip on his boarding pass. "I'm in the right place, sir." Preston let out a short, incredulous huff. He looked around at the other passengers in line, a woman in pearls, an older man reading the Wall Street Journal, seeking an audience. "Is that so? Listen, son, this is the priority access lane. It's for Diamond Medallion members and first-class passengers, not for kids trying to skip the line to ask for autographs." "I have a ticket," Darius said, his voice calm, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. He had dealt with people like Preston before. The trick was not to get angry. Anger made you look guilty. "Let's see it then," Preston demanded, holding out his hand as if he were the gatekeeper of the airline. "I'll show the agent," Darius replied, stepping forward as the desk opened up. Preston scoffed, stepping right up to Darius's shoulder, invading his personal space. Unbelievable. The entitlement these days. When Darius reached the counter, the agent, a tired-looking woman named Brenda, looked up. Her eyes flickered from Darius's hoodie to his face, and for a split second, Darius saw the hesitation. The same hesitation Preston had. Does he belong here? Darius handed over his passport and the ticket. Brenda scanned it. The machine beeped a pleasant, confirming tone. "Mr. Cole," Brenda said, her eyebrows shooting up. "Welcome. You're all set for 1A. Would you like access to the Horizon Lounge before boarding?" Darius felt a wave of relief. "No, thank you, ma'am. I'll just head to the gate." He took his boarding pass and turned around. Preston was standing right there, his face a mask of shock that quickly curdled into annoyance. "There must be a mistake," Preston muttered to the agent as he stepped up, brushing past Darius. "System error. Overbooking. You might want to double-check that, sweetheart." Darius didn't stop to hear the rest. He walked toward security, head high. He thought the worst was over. He thought the ticket was the ultimate proof. He was wrong. The ticket was just a piece of paper. To men like Preston Archibald, hierarchy wasn't about what you held in your hand. It was about who you were. And in Preston's world, Darius was nobody. Boarding the plane was an experience in itself. The Boeing 757 was massive, and turning left upon entering felt like stepping into a different dimension. The lighting was soft, amber and warm. The seats weren't seats, they were individual pods with sliding privacy doors, massive entertainment screens, and blankets that felt like cashmere. Darius found 1A. It was the prime spot. Front row, window side. He stowed his battered backpack in the overhead bin, looking starkly out of place next to the Rimowa and Louis Vuitton carry-ons of his neighbors. He sat down, sinking into the leather. He pulled out his phone to text his mom, "I made it. It's bigger than our living room." He was just putting his headphones on when the aisle darkened. Preston Archibald had arrived. Preston stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at his boarding pass, then at the seat across the aisle, 1D, and then at Darius in 1A. "You have got to be kidding me," Preston said, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Darius froze. He slowly pulled his headphones down around his neck. Preston slammed his briefcase onto his own seat, but didn't sit down. Instead, he loomed over Darius's pod. "You're still here? I thought the gate agent would have sorted this out by now." "Sorted what out?" Darius asked, his patience thinning. "The upgrade error," Preston said, gesturing vaguely at Darius. "Look, kid, let's be real. You're a standby, or an employee dependent. Or maybe you won some radio contest. But this," he pointed a finger at seat 1A. "This is a quiet zone. People here are working. We have meetings in London. We need sleep. We don't need—" He looked Darius up and down, sneering at the NASA patch. "Distractions." "I'm not a distraction," Darius said firmly. "I'm a passenger." "You're a kid in a hoodie sitting in a $6,000 seat," Preston shot back. He turned his head, snapping his fingers at a passing flight attendant. "Excuse me, miss." A flight attendant, whose name tag read Sarah, hurried over. She had a kind face but looked stressed. "Yes, Mr. Archibald? Is everything okay?" "No, Sarah, it is not," Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. He pointed at Darius. "I am a Platinum Horizon member. I have flown 300,000 miles with this airline this year alone. I specifically requested that the seat adjacent to me remain empty or be occupied by a fellow business traveler. I need to focus." Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Sir, the flight is fully booked, and Mr. Cole has a valid ticket for seat 1A. Preston laughed, a dry, humorless bark. "Valid? Sarah, look at him. Did he pay for it? Did he?" "That's confidential passenger information, sir," Sarah said, trying to maintain her composure. "He didn't," Preston declared, turning to the other passengers who were now watching with rapt attention. "He's a freeloader. Probably an upgrade mistake. Look, I'll make this simple. I want him moved. Put him in economy comfort or whatever you have back there. I don't care. I just don't want to look at a teenager in a hoodie for 7 hours." Darius felt the heat rising in his cheeks. It wasn't shame. He had nothing to be ashamed of. It was fury. He stood up. He was tall for his age, nearly eye to eye with Preston. "I earned this seat," Darius said, his voice steady but hard. "I'm going to a tech summit in London to present my work. You don't know me, and you don't get to move me." Preston stepped closer, invading Darius's space again. "Tech summit? What, for video games? Sit down, boy. You're out of your depth." He turned back to Sarah, pulling out his wallet and flashing the platinum card again, as if it were a police badge. "Sarah, get the purser, or the captain. I am not sitting across from this ruffian. It's a security risk. I don't feel safe with him flailing around next to me." "Security risk?" Darius repeated, incredulous. "I'm sitting here reading a book." "You're aggressive," Preston lied smoothly, raising his voice so the back rows could hear. You stood up to confront me. That's aggression. Sarah, did you see that? He stood up in a threatening manner. Sarah looked panicked. She was young, and Preston was obviously a high-value customer. The airline terrified their staff into pleasing. Sir, please lower your voice. I will get the purser. Do that, Preston sneered. He looked back at Darius with a smug grin. You see how this works, kid? It's not about being right. It's about leverage. And you have none. Darius sank back into his seat, his hands shaking slightly. He looked around the cabin. A few people looked sympathetic, but most looked away, unwilling to get involved in a confrontation with a loud, wealthy man. Except for one person. 2 rows back, in seat 3A, a man had been watching the entire exchange over the top of a vintage pair of spectacles. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and a quiet, unassuming demeanor. He was dressed simply in a navy sweater and slacks. He hadn't said a word yet. He had just watched, his eyes sharp and calculating, observing every gesture Preston made, every word he spat. This was Benedict Stone. And Preston Archibald had no idea that the man sitting in 3A was the founder of Stone & Co., the venture capital firm that owned a 40% controlling stake in Omnicorp. The very company Preston worked for. Preston thought he was the most powerful man on the plane. He was about to find out that he was just a passenger on a sinking ship. As the purser, a stern woman named Karen, marched up the aisle, Preston smirked at Darius. Pack your bag, kid. Economy is waiting. Karen, the chief purser, was a woman who wore her uniform like armor. She had been flying for 20 years and had seen everything from drunken celebrities to medical emergencies at 30,000 feet. But as she approached row 1, she sensed a different kind of volatility. It wasn't the chaotic energy of intoxication, it was the cold, sharp pressure of power dynamics. Preston Archibald was standing now, leaning against the bulkhead with an air of practiced nonchalance, checking his cuticles. Darius was seated, his posture rigid, staring straight ahead at the blank entertainment screen, trying to make himself invisible. What seems to be the problem here, Mr. Archibald? Karen asked, her voice professional but tight. She knew Preston, not personally, but by his status. A global elite profile popped up on her tablet whenever he boarded. That meant handle with care. High complaint risk. The problem, Karen, Preston began, dropping her name with a familiarity she hadn't granted him, is that there has been a severe lapse in Royal Horizon's vetting process. I paid $6,000 for a premium experience. Part of that experience is the environment. He gestured vaguely toward Darius, and the environment is currently compromised. Karen looked at Darius. Sir, may I see your boarding pass again? Darius silently handed it over. His hand didn't shake this time. He was past the point of nervousness. He was settling into a cold, hard resolve. Karen studied the pass. It was perfectly valid. Issued by the Corporate Bookings Department. Code VIP Tech Grant. Mr. Archibald, Karen said, handing the pass back to Darius with a polite nod. Mr. Cole is ticketed correctly. He is a guest of the airline's corporate partners. There is no error. Preston's jaw tightened. He stepped closer to Karen, lowering his voice to a hiss that was meant only for her, though the acoustics of the cabin carried it clearly to Darius. I don't care who bought the ticket, Karen. Look at him. He's agitated. He's glaring at me. He's wearing a hoodie in first class, for God's sake. It's making me uncomfortable. It's making the other passengers uncomfortable. He turned to the woman in seat 2A, an elderly lady clutching a poodle. Isn't that right, madam? Doesn't he seem out of place? The woman blinked, looking terrified to be dragged into it. I just want to sleep, she whispered, pulling her blanket up. Preston turned back to Karen, taking her silence as agreement. See? Unrest. Listen, I know how this works. You have discretion. If a passenger is causing a disturbance or making others feel unsafe, you can move them. I am telling you, I feel unsafe. He was aggressive earlier. He stood up to me. I stood up because you were yelling at me, Darius said, cutting in. His voice was deep and calm, betraying none of the fear he felt. And I'm not moving. I earned this seat. There, Preston pointed a finger like a pistol. See that tone? Belligerence. Karen, I am the senior vice president of Omnicorp. We have a corporate contract with this airline worth $3 million a year. Do you really want me to call your VP of Customer Relations when we land and tell him that his purser prioritized a charity case over a platinum partner? Karen stiffened. This was the trap. In the airline industry, the customer wasn't always right, but the rich customer was always powerful. She looked at Darius. He was just a kid who had done nothing wrong. But the man standing next to her could ruin her month with a single email. She took a breath, hating herself for what she was about to do. She turned to Darius, softening her voice to a patronizing coo. "Mr. Cole," she began, crouching slightly. "Ideally, we want everyone to have a pleasant flight. It seems there is a personality clash here. We have a very comfortable seat in premium economy. It's an aisle seat. Extra legroom. I can offer you a voucher for $500 as compensation for the inconvenience." Darius looked at her, stunned. "You're asking me to move?" He's the one yelling. "I'm asking you to help us depart on time," Karen said, her eyes pleading. "If we have a conflict on the ground, the captain won't push back. We could be delayed for hours. Please, sir. Be the bigger person." "Being the bigger person always seems to mean the black person has to leave," Darius said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Preston let out a loud, mocking groan. "Oh, here we go. The race card. I knew it. It's not about race, kid. It's about class. It's about belonging. And you don't." Darius looked at the empty seat next to him. Then at the window, he thought about the summit in London. He thought about the investors waiting to see his solar algorithm. If he got kicked off this flight, he would miss the opening pitch. He would lose his chance. Preston Archibald knew exactly what leverage he had. He knew Darius couldn't afford a delay. "Fine," Darius whispered, his throat burning. "I'll move." The victory was electric for Preston. He didn't just smile, he beamed. He adjusted his cufflinks and sat down in his seat, spreading his legs wide as if claiming the territory he had just conquered. "Smart choice," Preston said as Darius stood up. "You'll be happier back there, closer to the bathrooms, more your speed." Darius didn't look at him. He reached up and opened the overhead bin. His movements were slow, heavy. Every zip of his backpack sounded like a scream in the quiet cabin. He pulled his bag down, hugging it to his chest. The cabin was silent. The other passengers, the wealthy, the elite, the influential, kept their heads down. Some looked at their phones, some feigned sleep. They had witnessed a bullying, a dismantling of a young man's dignity, and they chose the comfort of neutrality. Darius stepped into the aisle. He looked at the long stretch of carpet leading back through the galley curtains into the depths of the plane. It felt like walking the plank. "Make sure you get that voucher," Preston called out, popping open a bottle of sparkling water that Sarah had nervously placed on his tray. "Buy yourself some new shoes." Darius stopped. He took a deep breath. He turned back, just for a second. "You think you won," Darius said, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. "But you're small. You're a small man in a big seat." Preston laughed, taking a sip of his water. "And you're a nobody in no seat. Go on, walk." Darius turned and began the trudge. 1 step, 2 steps. He passed row 2. He reached row 3. The plane's engines began to whine, the pilot preparing for pushback, assuming the situation was resolved. The seatbelt sign pinged on. Darius was just about to pass row 3 when a hand shot out from seat 3A. It wasn't a violent motion. It was firm, precise, and authoritative. The hand grasped Darius's forearm gently but securely, stopping him in his tracks. "Wait," a voice said. It was a voice like grinding stones, low, textured, and impossible to ignore. Darius looked down. The man in the navy sweater, Benedict Stone, had removed his vintage spectacles. He was looking up at Darius with eyes that were a startling, icy blue. They were eyes that had stared down union strikes, hostile takeovers, and market crashes. "Don't go back there, son," Benedict said. Darius was confused. "I have to. The purser said—" "I don't care what the purser said," Benedict interrupted, releasing Darius's arm and slowly rising to his feet. Benedict Stone was not a physically imposing man in terms of muscle, but he carried an aura of gravity that made the cabin seem to shrink around him. He stepped into the aisle, effectively blocking Darius's path to economy, and turned to face row 1. The silence in the cabin shifted. It wasn't the silence of avoidance anymore. It was the silence of anticipation. Preston, sensing the movement, craned his neck around his seat. When he saw the older man standing in the aisle, he rolled his eyes. "Oh, great," Preston muttered loud enough to be heard. "Another bleeding heart. Look, Grandpa, the situation is resolved. The kid is moving. Sit down before you break a hip." Benedict didn't blink. He didn't yell. He just took 2 slow, deliberate steps toward Preston. "Mr. Archibald," Benedict said. Preston froze. He hadn't introduced himself to this man. He lowered his water bottle. "Do I know you?" "No," Benedict said calmly. "You don't know me, which is the single greatest failure of your career." The air in the first-class cabin seemed to vacate the room. Even the flight attendants, Sarah and Karen, froze in the galley, sensing a shift in the hierarchy that was invisible but undeniable. Preston squinted, his arrogance faltering for a microsecond before his ego kicked back in. He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. "My career? Buddy, I don't know who you think you are, but unless you're the Pope or the President, you're interfering with a Platinum member. Sit down." Benedict ignored the command. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, an old, functional model, not the flashiest smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times, his movements unhurried. "You mentioned earlier," Benedict said, his voice carrying clearly without being loud, "that you work for Omnicorp, Senior Vice President of Sales, correct?" "That's right," Preston said, puffing his chest out, "and we have a corporate contract that—" "I know the contract," Benedict interrupted. "I wrote the underwriting for the merger that created Omnicorp 6 years ago." Preston's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He looked at Benedict's sweater. It was plain, but now that he looked closer, it was vicuña wool. Rare, expensive, understated. "Who are you?" Preston asked, his voice losing its edge. "My name is Benedict Stone," the man said simply. The reaction was immediate. The man reading the Wall Street Journal in 2C gasped audibly, lowering his paper to stare. Karen, the purser, brought a hand to her mouth. Preston's face went the color of ash. Everyone in the business world knew the name. Benedict Stone was the silent king of logistics and tech investment. His firm, Stone & Coas, was the majority shareholder of Omnicorp. He wasn't just Preston's boss, he was Preston's boss's boss's owner. He was the man who signed the checks that kept the lights on in the building Preston worked in. "Mr. Stone," Preston stammered, scrambling to unbuckle his seatbelt. He tried to stand up, but his legs seemed to fail him, so he ended up in a clumsy half-crouch. I had no idea you were on this flight. Surely you understand, sir. I was just trying to ensure a professional environment for—" "Sit down," Benedict said. It wasn't a request. Preston collapsed back into his seat. Benedict turned his gaze to Darius, who was still standing there, backpack clutched to his chest, eyes wide. Benedict's expression softened completely, the icy edge melting into something grandfatherly and kind. "What is your name, young man?" Benedict asked. "Darius," he whispered. "Darius Cole." "Darius," Benedict repeated. "I noticed the patch on your bag. NASA. And you mentioned a tech summit." "Yes, sir," Darius said. "The Future Innovators Summit in London. I'm presenting a solar optimization algorithm." Benedict nodded slowly, impressed. "Solar optimization, that's a trillion-dollar industry. And you're presenting?" "Yes, sir." Benedict turned back to Preston. The softness vanished instantly. He looked at Preston like one looks at a rotted piece of fruit. "Mr. Archibald," Benedict said, "you claimed this young man was a distraction. You claimed he didn't belong. You claimed he was a security risk." I was mistaken, sir. It was a misunderstanding. The hoodie, Preston trailed off, realizing every word was digging his grave deeper. "You judged him based on his attire and his skin color," Benedict said, cutting to the bone. "You assumed that because he didn't look like you, he had no value. That is not just a personal failing, Mr. Archibald. That is a liability to my company." Benedict took a step closer to seat 1A. "You said you wanted a quiet environment to work? To focus on the company's future?" Benedict asked. "Yes, sir." "Absolutely," Preston nodded vigorously, sweating. Good, Benedict said, because you're going to need plenty of time to update your resume. Preston choked. Sir? You represent Omnicorp, Benedict said, his voice rising just enough to command the entire room. And Omnicorp does not bully children. We do not degrade innovators, and we certainly do not humiliate the very talent we should be recruiting. Benedict turned to Karen. Purser. Yes, Mr. Stone, Karen squeaked. Mr. Cole is not moving to economy, Benedict declared. However, Mr. Archibald is right about one thing. There is a compatibility issue in this row. Benedict pointed a finger at Preston. Get your bags. Preston looked around frantically. Sir, where am I going? You wanted seat 1A to be empty, Benedict said, a small cold smile playing on his lips. It won't be. But seat 1D will be vacant. You are moving. Karen, is there a seat in the rear? Perhaps near the lavatory? Karen straightened up, sensing the winds had shifted. A small smile touched her lips. I believe seat 42E is open, Mr. Stone. It's a middle seat. In the last row, non-reclining. Benedict nodded. Perfect. Mr. Archibald, enjoy the flight. You can't do this, Preston sputtered, panic setting in. I'm a platinum member. You can't just move me. Benedict leaned in, his face inches from Preston's. I own the airline's debt, Mr. Archibald. I can ground this plane if I want to. Now move, before I make that phone call to HR right now and have your severance package voided for gross misconduct. Preston looked at Benedict. He looked at Darius. He looked at the passengers, who were now openly staring, some smirking. Defeated, crushed, and utterly humiliated, Preston grabbed his briefcase. He grabbed his coat. He didn't look at anyone as he squeezed past Darius. Darius stood his ground this time. He didn't move an inch. Preston had to turn sideways to get past him, brushing against the hoodie he so despised. As Preston trudged toward the back of the plane, dragging his expensive luggage toward row 42, a few passengers started to clap. It began with the lady in 2A, and soon the whole first-class cabin was applauding. Benedict waited for Preston to disappear behind the curtain. Then he turned to Darius. Darius, Benedict said, gesturing to the empty seat 1A. Please, sit down. And actually... Benedict looked at his own boarding pass for 3A, then at the empty seat 1D where Preston had been. Do you mind if I join you? I'd love to hear more about this algorithm of yours. Omnicorp is looking for new investments, and I suddenly find myself with a vacancy in the VP department. Darius smiled, a genuine bright smile that lit up his face. He tossed his backpack into the overhead bin, right on top of where Preston's briefcase used to be. I'd like that, sir, Darius said. Please, the older man said, settling into the seat next to him. Call me Ben. The atmosphere in row 1 had transformed from a battleground into a boardroom. The ambient lighting of the cabin shifted to a soft violet as the aircraft reached cruising altitude, severing the connection to the ground and the chaotic hierarchy of the terminal. Darius sat with his tray table deployed. It wasn't covered with the gourmet meal the flight attendants were serving, though a plate of seared scallops and truffle risotto sat to the side, but with a schematic he had drawn on a Royal Horizon napkin. It's not just about the capture rate of the panels, Darius explained, his voice animated, his earlier fear completely replaced by the confidence of an expert in his element. He tapped the napkin with a pen Benedict had lent him, a Mont Blanc that probably cost more than Darius's laptop. The issue is heat dispersion. When the cells get too hot, efficiency drops. My code predicts the heat spikes based on local weather patterns and adjusts the angle of the panels by microdegrees to use the wind for cooling without losing direct sunlight. Benedict Stone sat in 1D, his reading glasses perched on his nose, staring at the napkin as if it were a map to a buried treasure. He wasn't humoring the boy. He was scrutinizing him. Benedict hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by being nice. He built it by being sharp. And right now he was testing the steel in Darius's spine. The hardware limitations, Benedict challenged, taking a sip of his Pinot Noir. Most commercial solar farms use single-axis trackers. They can't make micro-adjustments fast enough to match your code. The motors would burn out in 6 months. Darius didn't flinch. That's why the algorithm is predictive, not reactive, he countered instantly. It doesn't chase the wind. It anticipates it using API data from local meteorological stations. It moves the panels before the heat spike happens. It reduces motor strain by 40% because the movements are slower and more deliberate. Benedict slowly lowered his glass. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. A look that terrified his competitors but signaled a golden ticket for his partners. Predictive, Benedict mused. Smart, very smart. He looked at Darius, really looked at him. He saw the frayed hoodie, the cheap haircut, the scuffed shoes. But he also saw the mind of an engineer and the heart of a fighter. You know, Darius, Benedict said, leaning back, when I was your age, I was driving a delivery truck in Leeds. I didn't have a suit. I didn't have the right accent. I walked into a bank to ask for a loan for my first logistics company, and the manager called security because he thought I was there to rob the place. Darius looked up, surprised. What did you do? I came back the next day, Benedict said, and the day after that. Eventually, I found a manager who was too tired to argue. He gave me the loan. 20 years later, I bought that bank. Benedict chuckled darkly, and I fired the first manager. He pointed a finger at Darius. Preston Archibald is just like that first manager. He thinks the suit makes the man. He thinks the seat number defines the worth. But men like Preston are fragile. They break when the world doesn't follow their script. You? You survived the humiliation and kept your dignity. That's an asset I can't teach. Meanwhile, in row 42, the experience in the rear of the aircraft was a different universe entirely. Preston Archibald was in hell. Seat 42E was the absolute center of the last row of the plane. Because it was the last row, the seats did not recline, blocked by the wall of the rear galley. Because it was the center seat, Preston had no armrests to himself. To his left, in 42D, sat a large man who had fallen asleep immediately after takeoff. The man was snoring with a sound like a chainsaw cutting through wet gravel, and his elbow had migrated well past the armrest, digging steadily into Preston's ribs. To his right, in 42F, was a young mother with a toddler on her lap. The toddler was currently screaming at a pitch that Preston felt vibrating in his dental fillings. "Can't you shut him up?" Preston snapped, his patience long gone. The mother, exhausted and bouncing the child, glared at him. "He's 2. His ears hurt. Do you want to try?" Preston turned away, disgusted. He tried to open his laptop to work, but there was no room. The tray table dug into his stomach, and the screen was pressed against the seat back in front of him. He felt trapped, claustrophobic. He needed a drink. He pressed the call button. 5 minutes later, a flight attendant appeared. It wasn't Sarah or Karen from first class. It was a harried-looking young man pushing a cart. "Yes?" "I need a whiskey," Preston demanded. "Double, neat." "That'll be $18, sir," the attendant said. Preston scoffed, reaching for his wallet. "I'm a platinum member. Drinks are complimentary." The attendant looked at his manifest. "Not in economy, sir. Only in Comfort Plus and above. You're in standard economy." "This is ridiculous," Preston hissed, his voice rising. "Do you know who I am? I was in seat 1A. I was moved." "Sir, if you want the drink, I need a credit card," the attendant said, unimpressed. "Otherwise, I have a cart to get down the aisle." Preston slammed his card onto the tray. "Fine, but I am writing a report about this. About all of you." "You do that, sir," the attendant said, swiping the card. "Here's your cup." He handed Preston a plastic cup and a miniature bottle of budget whiskey. Preston stared at the plastic cup. He looked down at his $3,000 suit, now wrinkled and covered in crumbs from the package of pretzels he had struggled to open. The toddler next to him let out another shriek and threw a sticky toy, which bounced off Preston's shoulder. He closed his eyes, imagining Darius in his seat, eating his food, drinking his wine. "It's just a flight," Preston told himself, gripping the plastic cup until it cracked. "Just a flight. When we land, I'm still the VP. I'm still the boss. That kid will go back to being nobody, and Benedict Stone will forget he ever met him. He was wrong." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, smooth and authoritative, announcing their initial descent into London Heathrow. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our approach into London. The weather is a mild 60 degrees with broken clouds. We'll be on the ground in 20 minutes. In seat 1A, Darius Cole looked out the window. The clouds below were breaking apart, revealing the patchwork quilt of the English countryside. greens and browns that looked peaceful from 30,000 feet. But inside Darius's chest, a different kind of landscape was forming. It was a landscape of possibility. For the last 3 hours, he hadn't just been a passenger, he had been a student. Benedict Stone hadn't treated him like a charity case or a PR stunt. He had grilled him. They had dissected the thermal dynamics of Darius's code, discussed the scalability of the hardware, and debated the geopolitical implications of rare earth mineral mining in Africa. Benedict closed his folder, placing his reading glasses into his breast pocket. "You have a good mind, Darius. A dangerous mind." Darius smiled nervously. "Dangerous, sir." "Disruptive," Benedict corrected, his eyes twinkling. "People like Preston Archibald, they are managers. They keep the trains running on time, but they fear change because change threatens their hierarchy. You? You are the change. You don't just want to run the train, you want to redesign the engine." Benedict leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "But remember this lesson. It is the most important one I will give you. Intelligence is a commodity, integrity is a currency. Preston has the former, but he is bankrupt in the latter. That is why he will lose, and you will win. Never let your ego walk into a room before you do." Darius nodded, absorbing the words. "I won't forget that." "Good," Benedict said. He pressed the call button. Karen appeared almost instantly. "Yes, Mr. Stone." "Karen, have my car brought around to the VIP tarmac exit at Terminal 5 and call ahead to the Excel Center. Tell the organizers of the Future Innovators Summit that Darius Cole is traveling with me. We might be 20 minutes late for the mixer, but he will be there for the main event." Karen beamed. "Consider it done, sir." She turned to Darius. "Mr. Cole, can I get you a hot towel before landing?" Darius looked at the steaming white towel on the silver tray. 5 hours ago, he had been afraid to ask for water. Now he was being prepped for arrival like a diplomat. "Thank you, Karen," he said. Meanwhile, in row 42, the experience of descent was vastly different for Preston Archibald. The air conditioning in the back of the plane had been struggling for the last hour, and the cabin was stiflingly warm. Preston was sandwiched between the snoring giant in 42D and the exhausted mother in 42F. His suit, the $3,000 Italian wool armor he wore to intimidate subordinates, felt like a prison. He was sweating. His neck was stiff from contorting away from the drooling passenger on his left. His legs were cramping from the lack of space, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the seething rage in his mind. He had spent the last 4 hours composing the email he was going to send to the CEO of Omnicorp the moment his phone reconnected to the network. Subject: unacceptable treatment, gross misconduct by flight crew. He had drafted the paragraphs in his head. He would paint Benedict Stone as senile, a man past his prime who was endangering the company's reputation by coddling unprofessional passengers. He would destroy the purser, Karen, for insubordination. He would ensure that Darius Cole was blacklisted from any internship program Omnicorp sponsored. "I will fix this," Preston thought, grinding his teeth as the plane banked sharply. "I always fix this. I am the VP of sales. I generate revenue. Stone is just a figurehead. The board will listen to the numbers." He was so convinced of his own invincibility that he didn't realize the ground beneath him had already crumbled. The wheels touched the tarmac with a screech and a thud. The thrust reversers roared. As the plane taxied to the gate, the fastened seatbelt sign pinged off. In first class, the movement was elegant. Darius stood up, grabbed his backpack, and shook Benedict's hand. They moved toward the door as it opened, stepping out into the cool, conditioned air of the jet bridge before anyone else. In economy, it was chaos. People stood up instantly, jamming the aisles, wrestling with overhead bins. Preston was stuck. He tried to push into the aisle, but a backpack hit him in the face. "Watch it," he snapped. "Relax, mate," a man in a rugby shirt said, not moving an inch. "We're all going to the same place." It took Preston 25 minutes to get off the plane, 25 minutes of standing in a humid, crowded aisle, smelling the stale coffee and sweat of 200 people. By the time he stepped into the terminal, he was furious. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He needed to call his driver. He needed a cigarette. He needed to scream at someone. He held the power button. The Apple logo appeared. The phone booted up, and then it began to vibrate. It wasn't a normal vibration, it was a continuous violent buzzing that made his hand numb. The screen lit up with a cascade of notifications so fast he couldn't read them. WhatsApp, 412 messages, missed calls, 27, Twitter X, you have been mentioned in a post by Oz Wall Street Journal, LinkedIn, security alert, unusual traffic on your profile. News alert, Omnicorp stock tumbles in after-hours trading. Preston stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the moving walkway, blocking people behind him. "Move it," someone shouted. Preston ignored them. He tapped the Twitter icon. His thumb was shaking. The first thing he saw was his own face. It was a thumbnail of a video. The title was simple, brutal, and viral. Racist VP versus the CEO, the takedown of the year. The view count was climbing before his eyes. 4.8 million views. 4.9 million views. Preston clicked play. The audio was crisp. "You're in the wrong seat, kid. Economy is back there. Smells like cheap peanuts." He watched himself sneer. He watched himself snap his fingers at Sarah. He looked villainous. The angle of the camera, filmed from row 2, made him look larger, sweating, his face distorted by arrogance. Then the camera panned. "My name is Benedict Stone." The comment section was scrolling so fast it was a blur. Halosh user 123, imagine losing your job over a seat. What a loser. London Tech. This is Preston Archibald from Omnicorp. Everyone tag them. Justice, served, the way the CEO just owned him. Chill bumps. Invest now, shorting Omnicorp stock until they fire this guy. Preston felt a wave of nausea so strong he almost vomited right there on the walkway. He stumbled off, leaning against a glass railing. His phone rang again. It was Jessica, his executive assistant. He answered, his voice a dry croak. "Jessica?" "Preston." Jessica's voice was icy. There was no Mr. Archibald, no warmth, just the tone of someone who was distancing herself from a corpse. "Where are you?" "I'm at Heathrow." "Jessica, listen to me. It's out of context. The video, it's edited. I need you to get legal on the phone. Draft a statement saying I was under medical duress." "Preston, stop." Jessica cut him off. "There is no legal. The legal team is representing the company, not you." "What?" "The board met an hour ago," Jessica said. "Benedict Stone called in from the plane. He gave them an ultimatum. Him or you." Preston closed his eyes. He knew that math. Benedict Stone was worth billions. Preston was an employee. "And," Preston whispered, "you're fired, Preston. Immediate effect, gross misconduct, violating the code of ethics, bringing the company into disrepute." "They can't do that without a hearing," Preston shouted, causing a passing family to veer away from him in fear. "I have a contract." "They invoked the morality clause," Jessica said. "It's ironclad. And Preston, security is packing up your office right now. They're boxing your personal items. They'll be couriered to your home address. Do not come to the building. Your badge has been deactivated." "But the summit," Preston stammered, grasping at straws. "I'm supposed to speak at the logistics panel tomorrow." "They cancelled you," she said. "They replaced you with the VP from DHL." "Preston, nobody wants to be seen with you. I have to go. I'm already deleting your number." The line went dead. Preston stared at the phone. He looked up. Across the terminal, on a giant LCD advertising screen, the news channel Sky News was playing. And there, on the giant screen, was the video. His face, 10 feet tall, sneering at a teenager. The headline below read, "AR Rage, Corporate Executive Shamed by Own Chairman." He looked around. People were noticing. A group of teenagers pointed their phones at him. A man in a suit shook his head in disgust and walked away. Preston Archibald, the man who thought he owned the sky, was suddenly the loneliest man on earth. He walked toward the exit, dragging his suitcase, looking for a taxi because his corporate limo was gone. It began to rain. The summit. While Preston was standing in the rain queue for a black cab, Darius Cole was walking through the glass doors of the Excel Centre in East London. But he wasn't walking in the side door. He was walking down the red carpet, flanked by Benedict Stone. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Stone, is it true you fired him?" "Mr. Cole, tell us about the algorithm." Benedict guided Darius through the chaos with a paternal hand on his shoulder. "Keep walking, Darius. Smile. Look at the camera, not the ground." They entered the main auditorium. It was massive, a sea of 3,000 faces, engineers, investors, tech giants. This was the room Darius had dreamed of entering his whole life. When the moderator announced the keynote change, a hush fell over the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, the Omnicorp presentation has been cancelled. However, we have a special addition to the schedule. Please welcome the founder of Stone & Company, Benedict Stone, and his special guest, Darius Cole." The applause was polite at first, then raucous as people recognized them from the trending video. Benedict took the mic. "I'm not here to speak," he said, his voice booming. "I'm here to introduce. Today I saw a young man handle pressure with grace. I saw him stand up for his dignity without raising his voice. And then I saw his code." Benedict stepped back. "Darius, the floor is yours." Darius stepped up to the podium. He placed his laptop down. He looked out at the lights. He took a deep breath, remembering the feeling of the plane taking off. "Energy," Darius began, his voice steady. "It's not just about power. It's about flow. It's about being in the right place, at the right time, and knowing how to adapt." He launched into his presentation. It was flawless. The diagrams of his solar algorithm projected behind him, complex and beautiful. He spoke for 20 minutes, and for 20 minutes, nobody looked at their phones. When he finished, the silence lasted for a heartbeat, and then the room erupted. It was a standing ovation. During the Q&A, a reporter from The Times stood up. "Darius, everyone is talking about the incident on the plane. You've been thrust into the spotlight because of a man's prejudice. How do you feel about Preston Archibald right now?" The room went quiet. They wanted anger. They wanted a soundbite of vengeance. Darius looked at Benedict, who nodded slightly. "I feel sorry for him," Darius said honestly. The crowd murmured, surprised. "I feel sorry for him," Darius continued, "because he thinks his value comes from a seat number. He thinks power is pushing people down. Today I learned that true power is lifting people up. If Mr. Archibald hadn't tried to move me, I wouldn't be standing here. So in a way, I thank him." The crowd went wild. It was the answer of a leader. 6 months later, karma, when it hits, is rarely a single event. It is a slow, grinding erosion. For Preston Archibald, the landing was just the beginning of the crash. The firing was upheld. Omnicorp refused to pay his severance, citing the reputational damage clause. Preston sued, burning through his savings to hire a high-profile legal team. The court case became a media circus. Every time Preston arrived at court, he was booed. The judge, a stern woman who had seen the video, dismissed his wrongful termination suit in summary judgment. She ordered Preston to pay Omnicorp's legal fees. Bankrupt and blacklisted, Preston lost his penthouse in Manhattan. His friends in high society stopped returning his calls. His fiancée, a socialite named Cynthia, left him 2 weeks after the video went viral, stating that he was bad for her brand. 6 months later, Preston was living in a small, one-bedroom apartment in Ohio, working as a supply chain consultant for a regional trucking company. He made $60,000 a year, less than he used to spend on wine. He was flying to a client meeting in Cleveland. He walked onto the plane, a budget carrier. He walked down the aisle, row 1, row 10, row 20. He stopped at row 34. "Excuse me," he muttered to the teenager sitting in the aisle seat. "You're in the middle, mate," the kid said, not looking up from his phone. Preston squeezed into the middle seat. It was tight. His knees hit the seat in front of him. He looked around. No champagne, no hot towels. Just the smell of recycled air and the hum of the engine. He pulled out a magazine from the seat pocket. On the cover of Business Week was a face he knew. It was Darius Cole. Darius looked older, sharper, wearing a fitted suit, standing in front of a massive solar farm. The headline read, "The Billion-Dollar Teen, How Darius Cole and Benedict Stone Are Rewiring the World." Preston stared at the photo. He stared at Darius's confident smile. He closed the magazine, shoved it back into the pocket, and closed his eyes. "Peanuts?" the flight attendant asked, bumping his shoulder with the cart. Preston opened his eyes. "What? Do you want peanuts? They're $2. Preston sighed, a long, defeated sound that no one heard over the roar of the engines. No, Preston whispered, I'm good. Darius Cole didn't just win a seat, he won a future. His company SolarFlow went public 3 years later, revolutionizing green energy in developing nations. He started a scholarship fund for underprivileged students in STEM, specifically paying for first-class tickets for them to travel to interviews, ensuring they always arrived with their heads held high. Benedict Stone retired 5 years later, leaving his seat on the board to his protégé, Darius. And as for the seat, 1A on Royal Horizon Flight 404 to London, it became something of a legend. Travellers would request it, hoping that some of that magic, some of that justice would rub off on them. Because in the end, the world doesn't care about the ticket in your hand. It cares about the heart in your chest. Whatever seat you're in today, remember, never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. If you loved this story of justice served and dreams achieved, please smash that like button. It helps us share these stories with the world. Make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you're the first to hear our next adventure. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Darius's shoes? I read every comment. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.